My name is Amelia, and I suppose if known had looked at my life from the outside, they'd say I had it all figured out. A stable marriage, a well-kept home line, a quiet suburban neighborhood, a circle of friends who still hosted book clubs and wine nights. Like clockwork. I was 58, comfortable, settled, or so I thought. It all started on a Sunday, thinking that felt too quiet. My husband Mark had left that morning on a week-long fishing trip with his old college buddies. 'Twas the kind off thing he looked forward to all year. Andy encouraged him to go, even helped him pack. We needed the space, I told myself. Lately, everything between us had felt a little muted, as if the color had drained out of our conversations. He didn't notice the things I wore anymore, and I had stopped trying to make him look at me like he used to. We just coasted that afternoon. I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of sauce for dinner and sipping a glass of white wine when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting Gagnon. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find William standing there. He smiled with that half grin that reminded me so much of Marquand. He was younger. William, our son's best friend since they were kids. Now 27, tall and lean, with eyes far older than his age. He used to come over every summer, growing up, barefoot, loud. Always with a basketball in one hand. But now he was a man. A quiet, careful man who had grown into his skin in ways I hadn't quite realized until that man. "Hey, Barbara," he said, stepping onto the porch. I ran into Mark yesterday, and he mentioned he'd be gone a week. I was in the area and thought he'd stop by, say hello. He shifted his weight, a little hesitant. I noticed how his dark t-shirt clung to his chest, how his jeans hugged his hips just right. Scolded myself for even thinking it. "Oh," I said, stepping back. "Course, come in. I was just making dinner." Hesmold walked inside, and that scent clean soap. A hint of musk trailed bend him like a shadow. We sat at the kitchen island, and he poured him a glass of wine. We talked about everything and nothing. His new job downtown, his mom who'd recently moved out of state, his memories of Thee's house, how it still smelled like a cinnamon and fabric softener. He looked around like he was remembering a past life. "You haven't changed at all," he said, his voice lower now. I laughed, brushing my hair back. "Oh, I've changed Ed plenty. I've just gotten good at hiding got." There was a pause long enough to Bainatist. I turned back to Sturthithos, but I felt him watching. Me, his gaze wasn't the casual kind you throw around. It lingered. It wrapped around my shoulders like warm water. "You look beautiful, Barbara." I stopped stirring. It wasn't the words themselves. It was how he said them. Not like a boy fumbling compliments, but like a man knew exactly what he saw. I turned slowly. "That's sweet of you to say." He didn't flinch. "It's not sweet, it's true." That was when the air changed. There was a thickness to it, like the moment before a summer storm. When the sky turns a strange color and everything holds its breath. He stepped back, unsure of where to go, how to shift the energy back to safer territory. "You should stay for dinner," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "I made too much anyway." He nodded, and just like that, the tension dissolved into the sound of plates clinking and water boiling. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just attraction, beauty awareness. I was being seen, not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but as a woman. We ate together, the meal stretching out with laughter and little stories. Told me about the woman he had been dating, how it hadn't worked out, how most women his age didn't interest him. "They don't get me," he said, his fingers toying with the stem of his glass. "I guess I'm drawn to something more grounded, more real." I met his gaze, and he swears something inside me jolted. Acquiat fluttered that had nothing to do with the wine. After we finished, I cleared the dishes while he leaned against the counter, watching me again. I felt the heat of his eyes on my back. I turned, wanting to say something light, something casual. But I found him closer than I expected. He reached over, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and let his hand rest a second too long on my cheek. "It thought about this. he said, voice low. Didn't move, I didn't breathe. My heart was thudding in my chest, loud and reckless. William, I said, unsure of what come on next. My voice trembled. This it is not right. I know, he replied. That's why I wait until he was gone. His honesty stunned him. He didn't pretend. He didn't dance around it. But he's your father, he whispered. No, he said gently. He's your husband, and you don't look at him way, you just looked at me. I froze. He was right, and it scared me how easily I could admit it to myself. We stood there suspended in silence. Could have pulled away. Could have reminded him of all the reasons this was wrong, but I didn't echo something inside me wanted. To be wanted, not out of duty or history, but back, 'cause someone saw me and chose me. I didn't touch him. I didn't say another word. I just stepped back and told him I needed to think. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. Then he left, and E stood alone in the kitchen, breathless, unsure. But more alive than I had felt in years. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold in my hands, staring out the window like I was waiting for an answer. To fall from Nesky. The sunlight spilled through their glass, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, and everything around me felt you still. Like the world was holding Guy's breath, just like I was. I hadn't slept, not really. I kept turning over what William had said, the way he'd looked at me, like I was more than just a fixture in someone else's life. And it wasn't just the words or the tension. 'Twas something deeper, something I hadn't felt in decades. Something that scurried. At my age, emotions are supposed to be settled, right? That's the lie wheddle ourselves that we're past the point of craving attention, of needing to be seen. But when someone younger, someone unexpected, steps in and mirrors all the things you stopped believing about yourself, it shakes something loose. By noon, I still hadn't called anyone a rev and showered. I couldn't bring myself to do the usual things. I was suspended in this strange place between guilt and curiosity. Then my phone lit up. It was a message from William. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I just couldn't hold it in any longer. I push you, but I meant every word. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered above the screen and my breath shallow. I typed, "We need to talk, but not here." I didn't know what I was doing. Just did. I didn't want to pretend I could go back to normal without facing this, and needed to understand what had changed in him and in me. He replied almost immediately. Say when and where, I'll be there. We met that evening at the park on Rosemont Avenue, the one with the old stone benches and the tall trees that used to shelter neighborhood kids during summer breaks. I chose that place because it felt neutral, safe. A place where emotions couldn't sneak up too icily. I saw him walking toward me from across lawn, wearing a dark green sweater and jeans. His hands were in his pockets, but his eyes found me fast, locking. There was a nervousness in his step, but also a kind of purpose. I stood when he approached, heart thudding again, just like the night before. You look good, he said softly. Let's just talk, I replied, motioning to the bench. We sat beside each other, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There were a few kids in the desk stands playing near the swings. Then older couple walked by, slowly holding hands. I don't understand what this is, I finalised. You were like a second son, too. Me. I've known you since you were 10, and now I'm not 10. He said gently, I'm not a boy anymore, and you're not just someone's wife. Not to me. His words made my stomach tighten. He looked at me really blocked. I've carried this with me for a long time since I came back last year. Q probably didn't notice, but I did. The way you smiled at but your eyes looked tired. Like you were trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted. And I wanted to tell you LD in single quotes. T. William. You don't understand. If anyone ever found out, your father, my husband. He nodded. I do understand. I'm no tasking you to do anything. I just wanted you to know. I'm not here to destroy your life. I'm here because I care. And because you deserve more than buying Ginvable. My throat tightened. No one had sent anything like that to me in years, not even close. I'd been their liable wife, the comforting presence, the steady figure. Never the woman whose heartbeat could still speed up just from a look. I don't know what I admitted. That's okay, he said. I'll wait. That maiden turned toward him. Wait for what? For you to believe it? To want it for yourself? I shook my head slowly. This isn't just about me. You know that. He nodded. Ick no, but I can't lie to myself anymore. Being around you, it makes everything feel small, and I can't pretend it doesn't mean something. There was silence again, but it wasn't thievy this time. It was thick with the truth of what we both knew. When he stood too. Walk me to the car, I asked. We walked side by side down the gravel path. He didn't try to hold my hand. He didn't touch me, but the space between us felt full, almost electric. When we reached me car, I turned toward him. I don't know what this is going to look like, I sighed, and I don't know if I'll regret this. But I know one thing. I feel Alavwan, I talk to you. That terrifies me. He stepped closer slowly, carefully, then let it terrify you. Just don't run from it. I looked up at him, his face just inches from mine. His eyes were filled with something real, something patient. And in that moment, I didn't pull away. He didn't kiss me. He just brushed my hand with his fingers. Light, respectful. As if asking without asking. I drove home afterward, the sun dipping low in the sky. The world painted in warm amber, and I couldn't stop touching my lips with my fingers. Even though he hadn't kissed me, because somehow it already felt like he had. The house felt different after that, not just quieter, emptier in a way that unsettled me. I moved through the rooms like a guest in Somi and Elsa's life, noticing the small details I'd long stopped seeing. The framed photos of Mark and me from a rarely years, the knickknacks we'd collected on vacations. The throw blanket I'd knitted during a winter, when we still sat close on the couch. All of it felt like a museum of a marriage that had once been full but now sat dormant behind glass. I kept thinking about William. The way he'd looked at me, the calm certainty in his voice when he said he'd wait. It had been 2 days since we spoke. In the park, and he hadn't reached out again. Not a single message, and somehow that made it worse. It left room for me to wonder, did he mean it? Or was it just a moment off heat of misplaced desire? I wanted to forget it. Truly, I tried. I threw myself into cleaning, into cooking meals I didn't even eat, into folding laundry that didn't need folding. But none of it worked. 'Cause when got quiet at night and I crawled into bed alone, I could still feel his words settling over me like a second skin. On the third night, I gave in. I sent them a message. I need to see you, just talk. The reply came less than a minute later. Come over. I'm home. I stared at the screen, hard-a-marring. I didn't tell myself I was making a mistake. I didn't try to justify it. He just got dressed, jeans and a fitted blouse I hadn't worn in ages. One that dipped a little too low at the neckline, and drove. He lived in a small, quiet apartment building just outside town Ina, top-floor unit with large windows and hardwood floors. When I knocked, high upon the door almost immediately, he looked surprised to see me stand in there in the doorway. Hair down, lips slightly parted, breath uneven. Barbara, he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. His place smelled like cedar and clean laundry. It was sparsely decorated but warm. Small stack of books on the coffee table. A candle burning in the corner. It felt lived in, but not cluttered. Like him, clean, intentional. I shouldn't be here, I said, setting me purse down. But I didn't know where else to go. You're always welcome here, he said, closing the door gently behind. I turned to face him, arms crossed against myself. Not because I was cold, but because I didn't trust what might happen if I let myself relax. I keep asking myself, what's wrong with him? I admitted why a part of me keeps thinking about you, about what you said. Why? I didn't shut it down. There's nothing wrong with you. He said you feel something. That's not a flaw. It feels wrong. He stepped closer. Does it feel wrong because it is or because it's new? I swallowed hard, not answering. He reached for my hand, holding it lightly. I would never hurt you. Do you know that, Tongu? I nodded slowly, the lump in my throat growing. Then tell me to stop, Hesed. If you want me to stop, just say the word. But I didn't. Because in that moment, every doubt, every hesitation, every guilt-soaked thought was eclipsed by the simple truth that I wanted to feel again. To be touched not out of habit, but out of hunger. To be looked at, not as Omion's wife, but as someone worth wanting. So I stepped toward him, and he kissed him. It wasn't fast, it wasn't hungry or desperate. Okay, it was gentle, deliberate. A kisses that asked for permission with every inch. Kiss that said, Urialloed to be loved. His hands stayed at my waist, firm but respectful. And when we finally pulled apart, I realized I had tears in my eyes. Are you okay? He whispered, brushing his thumb beneath me cheekbone. I nodded, unable to speak. We sat down on the couch, still close, his arm grazing mine. I told him things I had not said out loud in years. How lonely I'd been. How invisible I had started to feel. How I had almost convinced myself that this part of life, desire, connection, intimacy, was behind me. And listened. Really listened. No interruptions, no attempts to fix me, just his presence, his warmth, his unwavering gaze. I want to know you, he said. Not just you from Mark's life, the real you, the woman you don't show anyone. I'd looked at him, shaken by how easily it pierced the mask I'd worn for so long. I don't even know who that is no more, I said, voice trembling. Then let me help you find her. It wasn't just a line. It wasn't seduction. It wasn't mithing, rarer, honest, hopeful. He walked me to the door and I lingered there for a moment. Not quite ready to leave, but knowing I needed space to process everything. Good night, William, I whispered. Good night, Barbara. He didn't try to kiss me again. He didn't need to because he that. Kiss earlier had already changed something inside me. I drove home insolence, my mind swirling, my body hamming. And when I laid down that night alone in the same bed that had felt suckled for years, it didn't feel so empty anymore. Something had shifted. And I wasn't sure where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. The next morning, Kami, with a strange sort of calm like mine had made peace with the storm he'd spent so long trying to outrun. Is it in the sunroom with a mug of coffee warming my palms? The early light pouring across the hardwood floor like Asoft. Blanket. I could hear the hum off sprinklers outside, the occasional bird call, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. It was all so ordinary. And death, that was not the same woman I had been a week ago. Mark was due home tomorrow. That thought settled heavily in my chest. I loved him. At least the version of him I had spent most of my adult life with. But somewhere along the way, love had turned into obligation, comfort into routine, and silence had stretched. Between us, until it became a normal, we never fought. Just stopped pitching. And then William had stepadinto, that quiet space with all his scareful words and disarming honesty, and awakened something in me that I thought long since withered away. Not lust, not fantasy, something more delicate, something felt dangerously, like truth. Later that afternoon, I found myself driving without really choosing the destination. My hands guided the wheel. But my heart made the decision. I ended up in front of William's apartment again. He answered the door with that semaquiote expression, surprised but not startled, almost like he'd been hoping. I didn't know if I'd see you again, Hess said softly. I wasn't sure either, I replied, but I couldn't stay in that house one more minute pretending like nothing had changed. He stepped aside and I walked in. We didn't say much at first. He poured me a glass of water. We stood in the kitchen, close but not touching. It could feel the energy between us again, warm, gentle, patient. He wasn't rushing. He never did. I turned to him and spoke before I could lose the courage. I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to say anything until I finish. He nodded, eyes steady on mine. I don't know what the future holds. I didn't know if I'm brave enough to live the life I've built, even if it's not fulfilling me the way it used to. But what I felt with you, what I feel, it's not a mistake. It's real. And I think it needed you to show me that I'm still a woman worth being seen. You reminded me of something I forgot about myself, and whatever happens next. I'm grateful for thought. He reached for my hand slowly and held it between both of his. If you deserve her, then just to be remembered, he said quietly. If you deserve to be chosen. My throat tightened. My heart ached from the truth of it. I don't want to hear Tignon, I whispered. I know, he replied, and I'm not asking you to break anything. I'm just asking you not to forget what this feels like, what you'll feel like when you're with me. He pulled it gently into a hug, and I rested my head against his chest. It was a long, quiet embrace, not laced with tension or need, but full of understanding, full of possibility. That night, I didn't stay. I went home, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. Not the woman I had been. Not the woman Mark still thought he came home to. But someone new, someone I hadn't seen in decades. The next day, Mark came through the front door with his usual booming voice and fish stories, kissed my cheek distractedly, and tossed his bags by the stairs. I listened. I smiled. I asked about Thuther up north and whether the guy had caught anything worth bragging about. He talked and I nodded. But it all felt like we were acting in a play we'd rehearsed for too long. That night, as we lay in bed in the dark, I turned Neto. Him, Mark, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Can we talk tomorrow? Really talk? He was silent for a moment. Then he mumbled, sure, and rolled over. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. I didn't know how the talk would go. I didn't know if we'd find our way back or realize we'd already drifted too far apart. But I knew I couldn't go back to pretending. 2 days later, I met William at Thepperk again. Same bench, same soft breezy through the trees. I sat beside him and, for a long time, we just watched the world move. I talked to him. I finally said, hadn't say anything, just waited. I don't have all the answers yet. But ich know, I need to start living honestly. And that means figuring out what I want, not just what I've settled for. Ich notes over and laced his fingers through mine. No rush. He said, her. We sat there hand in hand, not making plans or promises, just breathing. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what came next.